Hi, this is the You, Me, We Therapy podcast. I'm your host, Jackie, and this is a podcast where when I say we, when I have guests and those that are participating by listening, but where I discuss emotions. And why am I discussing emotions? Well, because I'm a counsellor, I'm a therapist, and emotions are things that I work with on a daily basis, regular basis with my client work and in my practice. So I don't just share any personal details about any clients, so please don't worry. But it is an opportunity for me to psycho-educate with the things that I've come across, things I've understood, and just to bounce these ideas around people that are interested in this type of stuff. Today, I want to talk about spirituality and therapy. Reason being, I am unapologetically spiritual, yet it's not something I dish out in big bowls to people. It's something that I wouldn't want to impose on a client. Yet how do therapists and other people who work in a healing profession marry up their personal spiritual beliefs and their client work? For example, you may get many therapists who could consider themselves religious. And how do they keep that separate from what they're practicing, or do they keep it separate? In this episode, I'd like to explain my reasoning behind how spirituality works for me and what I really mean by spirituality and how it assists me in my role. This podcast is not a substitute for seeking professional mental health advice. If anything in this episode is upsetting and somebody feels they need further exploration with this, please seek professional advice. If you are unable to keep yourself safe, please take yourself to A&E. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be my attempt of explaining my reasoning. And let's start like this. Nothing can go faster than the speed of light, as we know. Light brings awareness. Light brings your vision to something that you couldn't see. Therefore, nothing can go faster than the speed of your awareness, or what you are able to be aware of is as fast as you can progress with something. And as you know, well, you may not know, there's a theory, and I'll say it's beyond a theory now, it's true, that the observer theory, when you're being observed, it impacts on how you behave, and get to understand a bit about their behavior by observing them. So if you look at it on a spiritual level, if you consider that you're being observed by a higher being, whether that be yourself, ancestors, a higher power, celestial beings, God, you're being observed. You may not be able to witness it, to see it to your eyes that you can see now, but the concept of you being observed probably would have an influence on how you behave. For example, so the observer observes another person, that a person who's aware that they're being observed, that knowledge can influence how the person behaves, the person who's being observed, and equally can have an effect on the observer too, because you could observe something and it have an effect on you, and you're sitting observing it, and you've got a lot of emotions churning inside of you as you're observing. So these two polar positions, the observer and the observed, have an influence on each other. And that's something that can happen in a therapy room. An observation is taking place by the therapist. The therapist is observing what's being said and what's not being said, body language, tone of voice. There's a lot. I've just given a few there, but there are many things that a therapist drinks in on an etherical level, energetically, in relation to the person they're working with. I'm going to give you another tool, another example of a tool of something that a therapist may use. A spiritual tool could be something like intuition. There be things that can occur in a counselling session that a therapist will have a knowing of, the client may have a knowing of, but it doesn't sit necessarily in the books and the theories that's been studied and learnt. It can come from an inner knowing, a communication that is coming from somewhere and resonating with some place within you that's giving you answers and possibly solutions to the things that you are witnessing, observing as a therapist. I can think of clients I've had that I've known things about them that I shouldn't know about. They've not told me in a session, but that when it comes up in a session, I've said to myself, I knew that about that person, but they hadn't told me. And I'm not saying that to spook anybody out. I'm going to share with you an example here. I had a time when I was working with a child, and a name that's a very unusual name came into my mind. And this particular name isn't actually a name of a person. It's the name of it's a title. Let's say, keep it like that. So after some weeks, I was working with this child, and it transpired they had been a twin, and their other twin had died from a young age. And the name of the twin was the name that came into my head the very first time I met this child. I didn't know that. I had no reason to know that, and that wasn't the reason why they were coming. It was not the presenting issue that brought them to counselling. But that's what I mean about there can be a knowing of stuff that you wouldn't necessarily, and I say you as in general, I'll own it, that I wouldn't necessarily know. I want to go into another example now of another view of how I look at spirituality versus counselling. And when I say counselling, if you consider it as a form of a science, because it comes under psychology comes under a science. It comes under social health and mental health. And these are things that have ologies behind them. You go to university and you get a degree in an ology in something, so it can be considered science. Now about this perspective, just something that runs through my mind. The theory of a black hole is a black hole because of the gravitational pull is so strong that light cannot escape. And the event horizon, the thing that caused the black hole, holds the information of that black hole. Therefore, if you consider it to like a trauma, someone's trauma is so deep that light cannot escape out of it. It can be a hard concept to be considered. The gravitational pull is to the event that caused the trauma. So if you can go to the event that caused the trauma, and that's where the information lies. And that's how counselling can take on trauma. That's my counselling take on trauma. Yet I've used quantum physics to put it together. So therefore, a spiritual concept could be as above, so below. These are things that are happening in the outer corners of the universe. If you consider it's got corners, it doesn't. But you know, the outers of the universe, something like a black hole. Yet, on an emotional level, in our minds, in our inner self, these things happen in our day-to-day life. These strong energies can happen. To me, it has a similar concept in my mind anyway. And so far I've talked about something going at the speed of light being awareness, the observer being observed. These are things that can affect us. Yet on science has wrote about things like theories. You have child observations, people who train in pediatrics study child observation. I've done child observations when I was training. Yet on a spiritual level, people can use that idea to consider themselves being observed by a higher power or their higher being. If you think of intuition being something that is like a hunch, what makes a good detective? A detective has a hunch, yes? I don't know, I've never trained as a detective, but if there's any police officers or detectives listening, does that ever come up in your training, the hunch about something? Yeah, what is that hunch? Is it intuition? And intuition, where would that come from? I'd say that comes back to my previous point about a higher power, a guidance, something guiding you. A black hole, for example, is something that comes up in quantum sciences. Yet I've just, in my mind, think of it a bit like a trauma in a way. And from that comes the potential for post-traumatic growth. And what drives behaviors are thoughts. And behaviors are a really big part of communication. You'll understand what somebody's trying to communicate by their behaviors, or there could be a real conflict in it. What somebody's behaving isn't actually the way they want to actually communicate. So the spiritual concept to me when it comes to that is about manifestation. How do you show up in the world? And what is it that you're communicating by how you show up in the world? Your reputation is a representation of yourself, and it takes layers on top of layers to build up a reputation. And yet that's something that's representing you in the world, like how you treat others and how you want to be treated by others, and your expression of yourself and your relationship with others and your mindset and your views, which then lead into your values, all kind of mixed together to make up how you are manifesting in the world, or how you have the potential to manifest things. You can tweak things like your relationships and the way you communicate in order to directly manifest something that you want. That's a very spiritual type concept, yet it can veer into the counseling world, especially when it comes to things like coaching and goal setting. And I'll give you an example of a mindset or a view that can be shifted ever so slightly, yet lead into spirituality, if you call it that. So let's think of an abundance mindset or a lack mindset. That could be considered a positive way of thinking or a negative way of thinking. Positive thoughts versus a negative pattern of thinking. Abundance versus lack. So the universe is abundant. It would have to be, because when there is a lot of something, by rights would exist its opposite, its counterpart. The opposite to abundance is lack. Therefore, lack exists. We know lack exists. We know what it's like to not have enough of something. We know that exists. A lot of people get stuck in a lack position. So because we know lack exists, therefore the opposite exists, which is abundance, right? We know lack exists because we've all experienced it, and sometimes, or at some time or another, we know its harshness. So therefore, by rights, universal law, that means the opposite of lack exists. The opposite is abundance. And that is a way that I could blend spiritual ideas with psychological patterns of thinking. It doesn't have to suit everybody. Somebody may hear this and think, I really wouldn't want Jackie to be my therapist. Somebody else might hear it and think, yeah, I really would like Jackie to be my therapist actually. But the important thing about practicing as a therapist is that it really has to match your personality. Otherwise, you're not authentic, right? So this matches my personality. It's why I'm trying to giving you examples of how I blend these together. And so somebody might say, for example, we're sticking to manifestation as an example. Yes, I want to manifest something, but the bit is the waiting. The waiting for it is hard. You could get yourself into these entangled messes where you don't want to think about it. You think about it, why is it not showing up? You're now in the energy of it not showing up, and you are encouraging it to not show up. It's like, what comes first? Like, how do you back, forth, 2 steps forward, 1 step back? I don't know right. It can be really tricky. I'm not a manifestation expert, I wouldn't say, but I think I've manifested enough stuff to the point that I think, I would advise this and not that. And I still seek ideas from others who are more skilled in it. But what I kind of hold in my mind is kind of needing to get out of the way of when you put an intention out there. An example could be when you phone a company, like a telephone bill or something, and you're left on hold, and you're left listening to that kind of on hold music. And this is like waiting for your manifestation. Think of a way of creating your own music or a song that you like to listen to while you're waiting for that thing to show up. Something that's a real mild, subtle, light, easy, go with the flow type of distraction, just like you get that music that you're humming along to while you're waiting for a call operator to pick up the call. And when you're waiting on those lines, you may not sit with your phone in your hand. You might put it on speakerphone and go and make yourself a drink. You might put your headphones in and put your phone in your back pocket and go and fold some laundry. You're waiting, but you're doing something at the same time, and you're not fully invested in just sitting there holding on, waiting for the phone to be answered immediately. You're doing other things. Your attention's mildly present to the phone, but what's helping is that little bit of music, right? The on hold music. So that's how I kind of would recommend something like manifesting, something like that. With some things in therapy, somebody may just want solutions and answers. And as a therapist, I'm definitely drawn to wanting to give solutions and answers. So I want to help somebody, but yet sometimes there are times when actually just acknowledging the lack of control actually can sometimes bring about a shift for somebody. And in a spiritual sense, that's like surrendering. Now I'm talking specifically spiritual. I'm using the word spiritual. I'm not referring to any religion or anything like that, or any structured religion with a title. I personally don't feel attached or necessary. Attached isn't the right word. I'll come back to that in a minute. I don't feel I need to be labelled of a particular religion. That's a different topic of another day. And however, I want to correct the word attached, because I would say that's not correct for me. I was raised Christian. I don't practice that in a sense nowadays, but I was raised Christian. So my foundational understanding, my early introduction into a spiritual existence came from that. There's no point me denying that. It's very, very true. And I often used to see mental health issues throughout the Bible when I'd read it. I always used to wonder about Saul in the Bible and how he had issues, didn't he? Right? Biblically, they have their own interpretation, but I would always read it and think, maybe he should, if he had a counselor, would that help him? Or like, what's going on? He's got issues with David. He has this kind of dark depression that comes on him. What's really going on, So mental health, I think, can be taken in, and counselling and these ideas can be taken into the other places where it's not really noticed in that way. Do they consider mental health in that way, the way that I've tried to blend it this way? Can it be blended another way, if that makes any sense? So to summarize, I just want to say that science can be used to support spirituality. I've given examples there. I've given examples of, so for example, 3 Nobel Prize winners are from the world of quantum entanglement, quantum mechanics, and quantum physics. And I've described my understanding of quantum physics through a black hole, and yet how I find it helps me with my understanding. Quantum physics, a discrete quality of energy proportional in magnitude to the frequency of the radiation it represents. So it's about, this is me summarizing it. If something so complicated can be summarized, but it's to do with energies. So on a level, science has been able to pick it up, formulate it into the written word, produce scientific papers that I'm sure are peer reviewed, to the point that it's won Nobel Prizes 3 times over in the recent years, and it's about energies. Spirituality for me is about energy. You can pick up on an energy of another person. People give off energy. Emotions are energy. So my interest in emotions is about the energy and the vibration and the frequency at which they can lift and lower somebody up. And my job, I feel, and I'm sure along with many other healing practitioners, is to support that other person with the energies that they have going on. Now, people like me and others tend to be described as empaths, almost like sponges. Because of that, protection needs to be made that you're not drinking in anyone's juice, and you can differentiate between your juice and another person's juice, and when to squeeze that sponge dry and start again and cleanse. There's a lot that goes into that, and these are things I will come onto in other episodes as I talk to other practitioners. But I hope this gives you a bit of an understanding of my approach here. Yeah, it was thick and dense, this. I hope you've been able to stick with it. And welcome back. But as you can see, if you're following me, I am building on an understanding here and wanting to build on an understanding here. So when we get further down the line, we are got a foundational, we're joint foundationally in where we're going with this journey. So thank you for your time.